Welcome to the video, Bible Prophecy and Mathematical Probabilities, Part 2 of 2. The scientific proof that God exists and that He has sent manifestations of Himself to guide humanity, including the new Messiah of the Second Advent. Now, if you have not yet seen Part 1 of this video, then you really should stop here and go back and see Part 1. To get to it, you go to YouTube and in the search box enter my channel, Integral Destiny 9, as you see here, and select Bible Prophecy and Mathematical Probabilities Part 1. But if you want to go ahead and watch this, you're okay. Just make sure you go back and watch Part 1. In Part 1, you will be introduced to the math of probability calculation. And don't you worry, if you're a math-phobic, you will understand it's very simple. Also in Part 1 is how that math applies to Jesus Christ fulfilling Bible prophecies. And also then the math is applied to the return of the new Messiah, with a brief introduction to the persons, the Bab and Baha'u'llah and the Baha'i faith, who fulfill 26, actually they fulfill 1,800 Bible prophecies, but only 26 are part of the calculation. Now in this Part 2, I review the 26 prophecies of the Bible used in this calculation to show how the Baha'i faith, the Bab and Baha'u'llah fulfill those 26 prophecies, and give details how they fulfill them. But please note that there are about 1,800 Bible prophecies that were fulfilled by them and the Baha'i faith, not just the 26 that were selected for this probability calculation. At the end of the video, I will give you some resources to help you access more information about how these other 1,800 Bible prophecies are also fulfilled by them. So on to our review of these 26 prophecies. The first prophecy that we're going to review, that the Bab, Baha'u'llah, and the events surrounding their coming have fulfilled, is Matthew chapter 24 verse 30. It has two parts labeled A and B here. First, the stars will fall from heaven, and second, then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man, meaning the Messiah, in heaven. The fulfillment of this prophecy was on November 13th, 1833, when the great star fall of 1833 occurred. Many witnesses to this celestial display wrote about it afterwards using words like constant succession of fireballs, the most remarkable natural phenomenon I've ever witnessed, it literally rained fire. Reports by witnesses came from Lebanon to France to North America. It should be noted here that the prophecy states that after the falling stars, then shall appear the sign in heaven. After the star fall of 1833, there came the appearance of a remarkable comet in the year 1843, 1 year before the advent and proclamation of the Bab in May 1844, as his being the promised one and the forerunner of him whom God shall make manifest very soon after him. This comet of 1843 was indeed that literal sign in heaven prophesied by Jesus. For more information how these prophecies by Jesus in Matthew chapter 24 were fulfilled by the appearances of the Bab and Baha'u'llah, see my two-part video titled Prophecies of Jesus Part 1 of 2 and Prophecies of Jesus Part 2 of 2. Now this is where we describe what the probability query is for how Dr. Matla arrived at the probability figure that you see here. Dr. Matla's query quote on what the probability by chance alone the prophecy would be fulfilled is that a few years before the beginning of a religion there should occur the greatest display of falling stars ever recorded in history. And the probability was 1 in 100. We're on to prophecy number 2. The sun and the moon will be darkened before the appearance of the Messiah, the Anointed One. And this is the Bible verse that it comes from, Matthew chapter 24, verse 30. Immediately after the tribulation of those days the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of heavens will be shaken. Note there are several other verses in Luke and Mark, and some in the Old Testament about these events that were also fulfilled, of course. And this prophecy was fulfilled when on May 19th, 1780, there was a widely noted dark day that was not due to an eclipse. These celestial events occurred before the births of the Bab in 1819 and Baha'u'llah in 1817 to literally fulfill this prophecy. This event was included in the 1883 edition of Webster's Unabridged Dictionary, thus, quote, "The dark day, May 19th, 1780, so called on account of a remarkable darkness on that day, extending all over New England. The true cause of this remarkable phenomenon is not known." End quote. The darkness started at about noon. It extended from New England down the eastern seacoast to northern New Jersey. Many observers documented that it was not an eclipse. When the moon appeared later that day, it was the color of blood. So, for prophecy number 2, the probability of by chance alone that a few decades before the beginning of a religion, the sun and the moon become dark in a most unusual way, the probability is 1 in 10, a very conservative 1 in 10 chance. The third prophecy, the Bible says that in the latter days God will set his throne in Elam. Elam is the ancient name for southwest Iran or Persia. And that's from Jeremiah chapter 49, verse 38, quote, "And I will set my throne in Elam, and will destroy from thence king and princes, saith the Lord." On May 23, 1844, a young man announced he was the promised one foretold by the prophecies of old. His divine title is the Bab, which means the gate of God or the door of God in English. The Bab made this proclamation in Shiraz, Persia, in an area that was called Elam in the days of the prophet Jeremiah. The Bab announced that one greater than himself would also soon appear, who the Bab called him whom God shall make manifest. Here is a map that shows the location of Shiraz, Persia, now known as Iran, where the Bab lived and announced his station as the messenger of God and the herald of another manifestation of God to appear soon after him, the person the Bab called him whom God shall make manifest. Note that Shiraz, in the part of the ancient world named Elam, is east of the Holy Land. And here's the probability rating for prophecy number 3, the probability by chance alone that out of thousands of districts throughout the world, a religion would have its beginnings in the southern region of Persia, and it's given a probability of 1 in 3,000. Prophecy number 4, the Messiah of the second advent of the latter days, who is called the glory of God, will come from the east, from another country, to the northern region of the Holy Land. And that prophecy comes from Micah chapter 7, verse 12, quote, "In that day they shall come to you from Assyria, and the fortified cities, and the fortress to the river, from sea to sea, and mountain to mountain." End quote. Note that Assyria and Persia are directly east of the Holy Land. And the Bible sources of this general statement of the prophecy, from Ezekiel chapter 43, verses 1 and 2, quote, "Afterward he brought me to the gate that faces toward the east. And behold, the glory of the God of Israel came from the way of the east. His voice was like the sound of many waters, and the earth shone with his glory." And from Ezekiel chapter 43, verses 4 and 7, quote, "And the glory of the Lord came into the temple by way of the gate which faces toward the east. The Spirit lifted me up and brought me into the inner court, and behold, the glory of the Lord filled the temple." End quote. Notice how many references to the gate, who is the Bab, and the glory of the Lord, which is the same as the glory of God, meaning Baha'u'llah, there are in these verses. These verses state that both the gate and the glory of God came by way of the east. And another Bible verse as a source of this prophecy, from Isaiah chapter 35, verses 1 and 2, quote, "The desert and the parched land will be glad, the wilderness will rejoice and blossom. Like the crocus, it will burst into bloom. It will rejoice greatly and shout for joy. The glory of Lebanon will be given to it, the splendor of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord, the splendor of our God. And this from Isaiah chapter 65, verses 9 and 10, quote, I will bring forth descendants from Jacob, and from Judah those who will possess my mountains. My chosen people will inherit them, and there will my servants live. Sharon will become a pasture for flocks, and the valley of Achor a resting place for herds, for my people who seek me. End quote. And another verse that has bearing here from Jeremiah chapter 50, verse 19, quote, But I will bring Israel back to their own pasture, and they will graze on Carmel and Bashan. These prophecies and more indicate that the Messiah will come to the northern part of Israel. Carmel, Sharon, and Bashan are all in the northern part of the Holy Land of old. These prophecies have been fulfilled by Baha'u'llah, the Messiah of the Second Advent, as follows. Baha'u'llah was born in Tehran, Persia, now called Iran, in November of 1817. Because of his being a follower of the Bab, he was exiled by the Persian king to Baghdad in 1853 in what is now Iraq, which was formerly known as Assyria. Then Baha'u'llah was further exiled by the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire a couple more times, until finally Baha'u'llah was sent to the prison city of Akka, Palestine, across the bay from Haifa and Mount Carmel in the north of the Holy Land, which is now Israel. Both Baghdad in the ancient land of Assyria and Persia lie to the east of the Holy Land. So Baha'u'llah came to the Holy Land, the northern part of the Holy Land, from the east. And this wrap-up of prophecy number 4, Dr. Motlah's evaluation of the probability of what is the probability by chance alone that a man who calls himself the Lord in the glory of God comes to live in the northwestern regions of the Holy Land. Now you have to remember something here. The prophecy in Micah that the Messiah would come from the east, meaning east of the Holy Land, in the latter days, Baha'u'llah was sent to the Holy Land as a prisoner of the Ottoman Empire, not at all of his own volition. And the probability calculation by Dr. Motlah was 1 in 10,000. On to prophecy number 5. A man called the glory of God will come to live in the strong or fortified city. That's from Psalms 60 verse 9 and Psalms 108 verse 10. Quote, Who will bring me to or into the strong city? End quote. Now the explanation in these Psalms, God is angry with humanity. David asked God to forgive humanity and provide divine deliverance to the people. God agrees to deliver those who fear God to or into the strong city. That's the place of the sanctuary of God, or the sanctuary of the Messiah. To further define where that strong or fortified city will be, from Isaiah chapter 35 verses 1 and 2, quote, The glory of Lebanon will be given to it, the splendor of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord, the splendor of our God. End quote. Lebanon borders Israel to the north, and both Carmel and Sharon are in the northern part of ancient Israel. And this is another biblical source indicating that the Messiah will come to the north of Israel and that the strong city that he will come to is in northern Israel. It's from Isaiah chapter 65 verses 9 through 10. Quote, I will bring forth descendants from Jacob, and from Judah those who will possess my mountains. My chosen people will inherit them, and there will my servants live. Sharon will become a pasture for flocks, and the valley of Achor a resting place for herds, for my people who seek me. End quote. More prophecy pointing to the Carmel region. This is from Jeremiah chapter 50 verse 4, 6, and 19. Now we're just going to read the bottom there. But I will bring Israel back to their own pasture, and they will graze on Carmel and Bashan. Bashan means, by the way, a fruitful plain, and they're both in the northern part of Israel. Again, indicating North Israel. This is a map of Israel, which was still Palestine at the time that Baha'u'llah was exiled there in 1868. In the prophecies just reviewed, the plain of Sharon is shown on the map by a green strip on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. Mount Carmel is shown as the Carmel Mountains reach the sea in Haifa, Israel. Ancient Bashan is shown in the upper right in that yellow shaded area. Now a quote from the scripture, "The splendor of Carmel and Sharon, they will see the glory of the Lord, Baha'u'llah, the splendor of our God." And Akka, the prison city, the fortified city, the strong city, is shown at the top left, and it is across the bay from Haifa. A little brief history here of how Baha'u'llah and the Baha'i faith have fulfilled this prophecy. The Bab was martyred in July 1850. Many thousands of the Bab's followers, called Babis, were horribly persecuted by the king of Persia, his government, and it was all urged on by the clergy. Over 20,000 of the Bab's followers, including women and children, were killed by the most disgusting methods. Baha'u'llah was initially one of the disciples of the Bab. He was imprisoned in an underground dungeon for several months because of that. He was released only to be exiled out of his homeland of Persia to Baghdad, in the formerly named Assyria, starting in 1853. Baha'u'llah spent 10 years in exile in the Baghdad area, with 2 years of it in solitude in the mountains. The Ottoman Empire exiled Baha'u'llah several more times, with the final exile to Akka, Palestine, a prison city, meaning a fortified or strong city, across the bay from Haifa, Palestine. Baha'u'llah arrived in Haifa by ship in 1868 as a prisoner of the Ottoman Empire. The top photo, which is a photo of an old photo, by the way, is an aerial view taken many decades ago of the prison city or fortified city or the strong city of Akka, which was in the land called Palestine at the time, which is now Israel. Akka existed at the time of the Christian Crusades and was used as a military post by them. There have been dozens of other uses of this ancient fortified city too. In the time of Baha'u'llah, a portion of it was used as a prison by the Ottoman Empire, as well as for other military uses. The photo on the bottom right is of the prison within that fortified city of Akka, where Baha'u'llah was imprisoned for several years. After his imprisonment in this building, he was finally released, but not allowed to leave this area. He was still a prisoner of the Ottoman Empire. Here again is the map to remind you where Akka and Haifa are located near the top of the map on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. Now Mount Carmel and Akka hold special status in Bible prophecy for the coming of the Messiah of the Second Advent, but it's also in prophecies by Baha'u'llah of the future of humankind. Now, after Baha'u'llah was finally released from the prison, he did visit Haifa several times, pitching his tent on the side of Mount Carmel and directing and instructing his son Abdu'l-Baha of what the future would hold for Mount Carmel and Akka. And here is Dr. Motlah's probability rating for this prophecy we just talked about, prophecy number 5. And what is the probability by chance alone that a man who calls himself the glory of God comes to live in the fortified city? And how many throughout history have called themselves the glory of God? And how many with such a title have lived without their own choice in Akka? He ranks the probability as 1 in 1,000. After the glory of God, the Lord of hosts, the Messiah of the Second Advent, comes to live on a mountain, the climate of that mountain changes for the better. And that summary of the prophecy comes from this, Isaiah chapter 35 verses 1 and 2. Quote, "The wilderness and the parched land shall be glad, and the desert shall rejoice and blossom as the rose. It shall blossom abundantly and rejoice, even with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given unto it, the excellency of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord, the excellency of our God." End quote. This prophecy has been fulfilled. When Baha'u'llah, his family, and some close followers who were devoted to him arrived in Haifa, it was a dry, barren land. Mount Carmel was a mountain of goat tracks. After Baha'u'llah was finally released from prison, but still under house arrest, His oldest son, Abdu'l-Baha, which means the servant of the glory, was able to acquire land and begin a long process of transforming this scrubland to beautiful gardens. The early Baha'is, mostly from Persia, worked to improve the horticulture of the area, bringing many varieties of plants to the area. The very climate seemed to change to help support these efforts. There have been many people who have noticed the change of climate since the 1800s in the Palestinian-Israeli area of the world. One of these was a Christian scholar by the name of Dr. David Regan. In his book, The Master Plan, on copyright about 1993, he observed on some improvements seen in Israel in recent times, quote, "And that is exactly what people exclaim today when they visit Israel, for it is once again a land of milk and honey. Over 300 million trees have been planted in this century," and that was in the 1900s. "Rainfall has increased 450%. The former malaria-infested swamps have been converted into cultivated land. Water from the Sea of Galilee has been channeled to the deserts, causing them to bloom." And remember this, taken at the end of the 1800s, and then this, taken just a couple years ago. What the difference is. The Bab's holy remains were brought to Haifa from Persia and buried in this sanctuary. This is an old photograph of that original sanctuary, and the photos from around 1910 to 1919. And it's on the side of Mount Carmel. And this is a photo of the shrine of the Bab from around 1952, when the superstructure over the original sanctuary was under construction. Ever since 1868, when the Baha'is arrived in the Haifa and Akka areas, a program commenced of the developing of beautiful gardens around the sanctuaries of the Bab once it was constructed, and then Baha'u'llah's sanctuary after his passing in 1892. This golden domed shrine of the Bab, built above the original sanctuary of the Bab, is on the side of Mount Carmel in the city of Haifa. The photo on the left shows the shrine from the bottom of the mountain looking up, and the one on the right is looking down on the shrine from above. Here are more photos of the beautiful Baha'i gardens that surround the shrine of the Bab, all the way up to the top of the mountain and down to the bottom. I took 3 of these 4 photos during my religious pilgrimage to the Baha'i holy places in Israel in the summer of 2010. At one time the gardens were called the Persian Gardens, but now they're known as the Baha'i Gardens. This, the vineyard of God, is truly blossoming as the rose, as prophesied in these Old Testament verses. And these photos were more of the ones I took while I was on pilgrimage. And more beautiful plants and colors on the side of Mount Carmel. And here you see the gorgeous flowers hanging down from the Baha'i Gardens toward the street below. The street actually goes underneath part of the gardens. And on the right, the photo shows the water that flows from the top of the mountain down, and here you are looking down the flow of the water to the very bottom of the mountain. And here are some other locations in what is now Israel, where Baha'u'llah, the glory of God, walked the earth. He's buried near the location you see on the right there, and the gardens were beautified to pay tribute to, of course, the station of the glory of God. So for prophecy number 6, the probability by chance alone that after the arrival of a person in a town, the climate of that town begins to improve. Dr. Matla ranked this as a probability of 1 in 100. Prophecy number 7, the glory of God would come to the Holy Land from the east of the Holy Land. And that's from Ezekiel chapter 43, verses 1 and 2, quote, "Afterward he brought me to the gate that faces towards the east, and behold, the glory of the God of Israel came from the way of the east." End quote. And a couple verses later in the same book and chapter, it says, "And the glory of the Lord came into the temple by the way of the gate, which faces towards the east." As already established, Baha'u'llah came from Persia, east of the Holy Land, and also east of the Holy Land is Baghdad, the location where Baha'u'llah proclaimed that he was the Messiah of the Second Advent, him whom God shall make manifest, prophesied by the Bab, the glory of God, the Lord of hosts, prophesied throughout the Old Testament, and the one who sits on the throne of the book of Revelation. And here's that map again, and you can see that both Baghdad, in the ancient land of Assyria, and Persia lie to the east of the Holy Land. Now to the probability of that prophecy, number 7, being fulfilled. What is the probability by chance alone that a man named the glory of God comes to the Holy Land from the east of the Holy Land? And you have to consider it has to be of one of 4 directions: east, west, south, or north. And Dr. Matla rates this as a probability of 1 in 4. Now the 8th prophecy is a prophecy that Jesus gave within the parable of the wicked vine dressers. It's in Matthew chapter 21, verses 33 to 41. Quote, "Hear another parable. There was a certain landowner who planted a vineyard," and remember, Mount Carmel means vineyard of the Lord, "and set a hedge around it, dug a winepress in it, and built a tower. And he leased it to vine dressers, and went into a far country. Now when vintage time drew near, he sent his servants to the vine dressers, that they might receive its fruit. And the vine dressers took his servants, beat one, killed one, and stoned another. Again he sent other servants, more than the first, and they did likewise to them. Then last of all he sent his son," meaning Jesus, "to them, saying, They will respect my son. But when the vine dressers saw the son, they said among themselves, This is the heir. Come, let us kill him and seize his inheritance. So they took him and cast him out of the vineyard and killed him. Therefore, when the owner," Lord in some translations meaning the Messiah, "of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those vine dressers?" They said to him, He will destroy those wicked men miserably, and lease his vineyard to other vine dressers, the followers of the new Messiah, Baha'u'llah, who will render to him the fruits of their seasons. So what does this parable mean? The vineyard of the Lord, or God, is Mount Carmel. Carmel is Hebrew for vineyard of God. This parable describes the coming of the returned Messiah in the station of the Father, Baha'u'llah, the glory of God. The errant vine dressers are the leaders, both secular and religious, who turn their backs on the new Elijah and the new Messiah and their new message from God. Baha'u'llah's extensive teachings in many tablets and books provide the blueprint for the direction of humanity for the next 1,000 years until the next manifestation of God appears. The vine dressers will bring about their own doom by failing to follow the new teachings, the new wine of the returned Messiah. That is the meaning of this parable. From the presentation up to this point, we know that Baha'u'llah did come to Mount Carmel and Akka in that region. He came to the vineyard of God, per the parable. But also the prophecy within the parable about the vine dressers has also come true. So how are the vine dressers doing, these secular and religious leaders, after 130 years after the passing of God's latest manifestation, Baha'u'llah? Just look around you at the state of the leadership of the religions of the world and the secular leaders of the peoples of the world. The problems stem from their not following God's divine prescription for this time. And Dr. Matla's evaluation of the probability that by chance alone that a man who calls himself the Redeemer of the world, or the Lord of the vineyard, comes to Mount Carmel, meaning the vineyard of the Lord. The probability he gives is 1 in 2. On to prophecy number 9, the Messiah who comes to the Holy Land under the control of thousands of his enemies is allowed to live permanently in that blessed land and establish the center of his spiritual kingdom on the mountain of God. And this prophecy comes from several verses. Here we have Isaiah chapter 65, verses 9 and 10. Quote, I will bring forth descendants from Jacob and from Judah, an heir of my mountains. My elect shall inherit it, and my servants shall dwell there. Sharon shall be a fold of flocks, and the valley of Achor a place for herds to lie down, for my people who have sought me. And from Zechariah chapter 2, verse 10, For behold, I am coming, and I will dwell in your midst, says the Lord. And from beneath that, Psalms 132, verses 13 and 14, For the Lord has chosen Zion, he has desired it for his dwelling place. This is my resting place forever. I will dwell, for I have desired it. The Bab is buried on Mount Carmel. His body was brought to Mount Carmel from Persia by his devoted followers. Baha'u'llah's sanctuary is just outside of Akka, Israel, a short distance from Mount Carmel. The world center of the Baha'i faith, the religion of the followers of the Bab and Baha'u'llah, is on Mount Carmel. A number of buildings of the institutions of the faith are constructed on the Ark, what is called the Ark, near the shrine of the Bab. They too dwell in God's vineyard. The Bab and Baha'u'llah's mortal remains are interred forever in the soil of the Holy Land, but they will also live on forever in the faith they created. The world center of that faith, the Baha'i faith, dwells on the holy mountain in the vineyard of God, Mount Carmel. Here are some of the buildings on the side of Mount Carmel where the institutions of the faith are housed. The building in the upper right corner is the seat of the Universal House of Justice. The Universal House of Justice is an elected body that governs the international Baha'i community, a community which extends to over 200 countries and territories on the globe. This governing body is elected every 5 years from a convention of the elected members of the various national Baha'i assemblies from around the world. In these ways, the Messiah and the Lamb will indeed dwell in Zion forever. So on to the probability of that prophecy being fulfilled by chance alone. That a man who comes to the Holy Land under the control of thousands of his enemies is allowed to live permanently in that blessed land and to establish the center of his spiritual kingdom on the mountain of God. Dr. Motlah's rating is a probability of 1 in 1,000. On to the 10th prophecy. The Messiah succeeds in attracting followers from all nations of the earth, and they will come to visit his resting place. And that prophecy comes from several Bible verses. This one from John chapter 10, verse 16. Quote, And other sheep I have which are not of this fold. Them also I must bring, and they will hear my voice, and there will be one flock and one shepherd. End quote. And from Zephaniah chapter 2, verse 11, quote, The Lord will be awesome to them, for he will reduce to nothing all the gods of the earth. People shall worship him, each one from his place, indeed all the shores of the nations. And from a couple of Psalms, Psalms 86, verse 9, quote, All nations whom you have made shall come and worship before you, O Lord, and shall glorify your name, end quote. And from Psalm 22, verses 27 and 28, quote, All the ends of the world shall remember and turn to the Lord, and all the families of the nations shall worship before you, for the kingdom is the Lord's, and he rules over the nations, plural. The followers of the Bab and Baha'u'llah, Baha'is, are in over 200 nations and territories across the face of the planet. There's about 6 million of us or so. And this photo is a sample of that. This photo is of Baha'is who came from all over the world to attend the dedication ceremony of the completed terraces project. And those terraces are above and below the shrine of the Bab, and this was dedicated in May of 2001. And here are more photos of the Baha'i delegates to that terraces dedication ceremony as more samples of the diversity of nations represented in the Baha'i community. They came to Haifa from over 150 different countries for this event. The bottom right shows a Baha'i from Thailand in her traditional clothing. The upper left photo shows two Baha'is in their traditional garb as well. The upper right photo shows the architect of the terraces. He's from Iran, Faraburz Sabha, and the composer of the Terraces of Light Oratorio, Lasse Thorensen, who's either from Finland or Sweden, I'm not sure which, at this inauguration ceremony in May of 2001. And here are shown Baha'i delegates from around the world to that terraces dedication. They're praying while they're walking the path to the shrine of Baha'u'llah. It should be noted that all the photos of the Baha'is on the terraces of the Shrine of the Bab and here are provided through the Baha'i International Community and the Baha'i Media Bank. More information about that organization is at the end of the presentation. An outside source looking at the Baha'i religion, this from Wikipedia, states as of March 30th, 2012, quote, "The Baha'i religion was listed in the Britannica Book of the Year, 1992 to present, as the second most widespread of the world's independent religions in terms of the number of countries represented." Britannica claims that the Baha'i faith is established in 247 countries and territories, represents over 2,100 ethnic, racial, and tribal groups, has scriptures translated into over 800 languages, and has 7 million adherents worldwide as of 2002. Additionally, Baha'is have self-organized in most of the nations of the earth. End quote. Thus, this prophecy is fulfilled. Dr. Matla's probability, by chance alone, that the man who is exiled to the Holy Land succeeds in attracting followers from all nations of the earth who come to visit his resting place. How many people have gained such an honor? Dr. Matla gives it a probability rating of 1 in 10,000. Prophecy number 11. The coming of the Messiah to the Holy Land will coincide with the return of the Jews to that blessed land. Now there's a couple verses throughout the Bible that refer to that coinciding of the Messiah coming and the return of the Jews. And this is one of them, Zechariah chapter 9 verses 16 and 17. "The Lord their God will save them," the Jews, "on that day," referring to the latter days, the second advent, "as the flock of his people. They will sparkle in his land like jewels in a crown. How attractive and beautiful they will be." End quote. On that day also is a reference to when the Messiah comes. And from Micah chapter 4 verse 1 and then verses 6 and 7. Quote, "In the last days, in that day, declares the Lord, I will gather the lame, I will assemble the exiles and those I have brought to grief. I will make the lame a remnant, those driven away a strong nation. The Lord will rule over them in Mount Zion from that day and forever." When it states "in the last days" at the beginning in verse 1, that means this will happen when the Messiah comes. The Messiah will also be the returned Christ. Before the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, there were important events that set the stage for it. March 21st, 1844 was one of them. That's when the Sultan of Turkey issued the Edict of Toleration that allowed Jews to return to the Holy Land. This resulted in many thousands of Jews returning, but not on a really large scale at that point. Now, just a couple months later, on May 23rd of that same year, 1844, the Bab made his declaration of his station as the promised one and the herald of one to come soon, him whom God shall make manifest, meaning Baha'u'llah. 1844 is the year prophesied in the Bible as the year the Messiah would return. See my video, Christ Has Returned, to see the evidence of that. It should be noted that there have been Jews in the Holy Land uninterrupted for thousands of years. However, the number was very small for many centuries before the 1800s. Many Jews remained in the Holy Land even after the various diasporas following various invasions and the beginning and expansion of Islam. Per Wikipedia, in the second half of the 18th century, Eastern European opponents of Hasidism, known as the Parushim, settled in Palestine. After 2,520 years of desolation, the Jews were at last allowed full legal rights in the Holy Land in 1844. And again, see my video by that title, Christ Has Returned. Then, 63 years after the Edict of Toleration was issued, the Balfour Declaration was issued in November 1917 by the British government. It supported a plan for a Jewish national home in Palestine. These two decrees resulted in even more Jews returning to the Holy Land after World War I. Jews began returning to Palestine in larger numbers after a man named Mordecai Noah, an American diplomat and a Sephardic Jew, began preaching the need to create the State of Israel. He started this, oddly enough, in the year 1844 in the United States. His October 1844 speech, called the Discourse on the Restoration of the Jews, was a proposal that the United States lead the world to create a refuge for Jews in Palestine. Dr. Matla, in his book Lord of Lords, devotes several pages to his story and states that Noah planted the seed of the thought for establishing a state of Israel. The birth of the Zionist movement may be at least partially credited to Mordecai Noah. With pogroms against Jews increasing in Eastern Europe in 1881, the first wave of Jews left there and went to Palestine to seek safety. The next wave of immigration was from 1904 to 1914. Emigration to Palestine stopped during World War I. But it started up again for the third wave from 1919 to 1923. The fourth wave was from 1924 to 1929. Then, with the growing persecution of Jews by the Nazis in the 1930s, more Jews emigrated to Palestine. Then World War II occurred. After the war and the undeniable horror of that pogrom against the Jews, even more Jews sought refuge in the ancient area of Israel. The UN finally recognized the new state of Israel in 1948. It should be noted in 1922 Jews were about 11% of the population, but by the end of World War II, Jews were about 33% of the population. It should be noted that the information here about immigration to Palestine by the Jews is from Wikipedia. And Wikipedia can be good sometimes and bad other times because people can go in there and change things. So just be aware of that. I don't have any reason to suspect this information, but it is from Wikipedia. You might look elsewhere to verify. Obviously, this prophecy has been fulfilled through a process that commenced in the year 1844, the year that the Bab proclaimed his mission and identity. And what is the probability, by chance alone, that the coming of the man exiled to the Holy Land coincides with the returning of the Jews to that blessed land? According to Dr. Matla, the probability is 1 in 20, a very conservative figure. Prophecy number 12, the Messiah will bring a pattern for global unity and a world federation. One of the sources of this well-known Bible prophecy, Isaiah chapter 11, verses 6 to 9, quote, "The wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, the calf and lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. The cow will feed with the bear, their young will lie down together, and the young will eat straw like the ox. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea." End quote. These verses are describing how the various different peoples and nations of earth will start to live together in unity after the Messiah comes and we start following the new Messiah's teachings. And there's this from Daniel chapter 2, verses 44 and 45, quote, "In the time of those kings," that's the kings of the latter days, "the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of the mountain, but not by human hands, a rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces." Now the allusion in that quote is from Nebuchadnezzar's dream, where he dreamed of a statue that had a gold head, silver chest and arms, bronze belly and thighs, iron legs, iron and clay feet. And part of that vision that Daniel had was this rock that broke off from the mountain and came down and smashed that statue. Now the statue was symbolic of the nations of earth at that time in that area of the world, and the empires that would come after Nebuchadnezzar. And the significance of the rock was that it would come down and smash that statue, and it would put an end to those empires, those warring and clashing empires. And that's when that quote was saying that God's kingdom on earth would come then at that time, and that would be in the latter days. So this is another prophecy of the coming of the unity and world federation, where the nations of earth would get along with each other. Now, after Baha'u'llah proclaimed his being the Messiah in 1863, he wrote tablets to the kings and rulers of earth. He called on them to make peace with one another and end their accumulations of weaponry to use on one another. Those rulers ignored his counsels. The only one of the rulers to give an open-handed response was Queen Victoria. Note that Queen Victoria is the only one of them that retained her throne and territories. Shoghi Effendi wrote this preface to Baha'u'llah's book, The Proclamation of Baha'u'llah. Quote, "The unity of the human race, as envisaged by Baha'u'llah, implies that the establishment of a world commonwealth in which all nations, races, creeds, and classes are closely and permanently united, and in which the autonomy of its state members and personal freedom and initiatives of the individuals that compose them are definitely and completely safeguarded. This commonwealth must, as far as we can visualize it, consist of a world legislature, whose members will, as the trustees of the whole of mankind, ultimately control the entire resources of all the component nations, and will enact such laws as shall be required to regulate the life, satisfy the needs, and adjust the relationship of all races and peoples. A world executive, backed by an international force, will carry out the decisions arrived at and apply the laws enacted by this world legislature, and will safeguard the organic unity of the whole commonwealth. A world tribunal will adjudicate and deliver its compulsory and final verdict in all and any disputes that may arise between the various elements constituting this universal system." Baha'u'llah's prescription for unity contains the following chief tenets: a recognition that there is only one God, and the difference between religions are due simply to the various times, places, and peoples to which the faiths were revealed. We must recognize that there is only one race, the human race. Women and men are equal in spiritual capacity and in worthiness to God. They must have equality in society as well. Prejudices between peoples, nationalities, and religions, among other prejudices, must end. Universal education must be provided to all peoples, and that education must include character development, meaning the accrual of human virtues as an essential element. Certain economic injustices must end, and the apportionment of the rights and responsibilities of capital, management, and labor agreed upon and maintained. The best beloved of all things in my sight is justice. Turn not away therefrom, if thou desirest me, and neglect it not, that I may confide in thee. By its aid thou shalt see with thine own eyes, and not through the eyes of others, and shalt know of thine own knowledge, and not through the knowledge of thy neighbor. Ponder this in thy heart, how it behoveth thee to be. Verily justice is my gift to thee, and the sign of my loving kindness. Set it then before thine eyes. That's from his book, Hidden Words. Another element of social interaction that is prescribed by Baha'u'llah is the use of the principles of consultation. Quote, "The Great Being saith, the heaven of divine wisdom is illumined with the two luminaries of consultation and compassion. Take ye counsel together in all matters, inasmuch as consultation is the lamp of guidance which leadeth the way, and is the bestower of understanding." End quote. And that's from the tablets of Baha'u'llah. In the authoritative writings of the Baha'i Faith, there are basic rules on how the consultation process is to be organized and carried out. This is a quote from our authoritative writings on this. Quote, "Consultation must have for its object the investigation of truth. He who expresses an opinion should not voice it as correct and right, but set it forth as a contribution to the consensus of opinion, for the light of reality becomes apparent when two opinions coincide. A spark is produced when flint and steel come together. Man should weigh his opinions with the utmost serenity, calmness, and composure. Before expressing his own views, he should carefully consider the views already advanced by others. If he finds that a previously expressed opinion is more true and worthy, he should accept it immediately and not willfully hold to an opinion of his own. By this excellent method he endeavors to arrive at unity and truth. Opposition and division are deplorable. It is better, then, to have the opinion of a wise, sagacious man or woman. Otherwise, contradiction and altercation, in which varied and divergent views are presented, will make it necessary for a judicial body to render decision upon the question. Even a majority opinion or consensus may be incorrect. 1,000 people may hold to one view and be mistaken, whereas one sagacious person may be right. Therefore, true consultation is spiritual conference in the attitude and atmosphere of love. Members must love each other in the spirit of fellowship in order that good results may be forthcoming. Love and fellowship are the foundation. That's an end of a quote, by the way, and it was a quote from the authoritative writings of the Baha'i Faith. There are many, many more teachings of Baha'u'llah as to how to establish the bedrock of peace through all levels of human society. However, there's a lot left to cover in minimal time. Please note that when the text states he, females are also included. The equality of sexes is a main tenet in the teachings of Baha'u'llah. The teachings of Baha'u'llah, if and when adopted by humanity, will affect interactions between individuals, families, groups, including governmental organizations, and nations to promote local and global unity and peace. Note that the pattern for global peace must start at the family level, then go up to interactions between people and groups, and on up and up and up until it's between nations and internationally. So we come to assessing the probability of prophecy number 12, that this prophecy could be fulfilled by chance alone, that the man who comes to the Holy Land calls himself a king and brings a prescription or pattern to follow for the establishment of global unity and world federation. And Dr. Matla gives this probability as 1 in 50. On to prophecy number 13 out of the 26 prophecies we'll be reviewing. The Messiah, the returned Christ, will come to the Holy Land and will introduce world peace as one of his main goals, and he will offer a plan for its realization. So it's not just talking about it, but he's going to give a plan. And this prophecy comes from a couple Bible sources. Here is Psalms chapter 46, verses 6 through 9. Actually, it's verse 9 there. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. And this verse from Isaiah chapter 54, verse 10, quote, "Though the mountains be shaken and the hills be removed, Yet my unfailing love for you will not be shaken, nor my covenant of peace be removed, says the Lord who has compassion on you." End quote. A covenant is an agreement, meaning a plan. Thus this prophecy is stating that the Messiah will bring a plan for peace. And this from Micah chapter 4 verse 3, quote, "He will judge between many peoples and will settle disputes for strong nations far and wide. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war any more." End quote. Remember what Jesus himself said in Luke chapter 12 verse 51, quote, "Do you think I came to bring peace on earth? No, I tell you, but division." End quote. And this prophecy of Jesus has come true. Peace has not come in his dispensation. Rather, God knew that it would not be possible until the second advent of the Messiah to accomplish this foretold occurrence. This next long quote from Baha'u'llah contains the key ingredients of his peace plan. Quote, "The Great Being, wishing to reveal the prerequisites of the peace and tranquility of the world and the advancement of its peoples, hath written, The time must come when the imperative necessity for the holding of a vast and all-embracing assemblage of men will be universally realized. The rulers and kings of the earth must needs attend it, and participating in its deliberations must consider such ways and means as will lay the foundations of the world's great peace amongst men. Such a peace demandeth that the great powers should resolve, for the sake of the tranquility of the peoples of the earth, to be fully reconciled amongst themselves. Should any king take up arms against another, all should unitedly arise and prevent him. If this be done, the nations of the world will no longer require any armaments except for the purpose of preserving the security of their realms and maintaining internal order within their territories. This will ensure the peace and composure of every people, government, and nation. We fain would hope that the kings and rulers of the earth, the mirrors of the gracious and almighty name of God, may attain unto this station and shield mankind from the onslaught of tyranny." End quote. This is from Baha'u'llah's book, Tablets of Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah wrote tablets to many kings and rulers proclaiming his identity and what they needed to do to ensure the peace of the world and the well-being of their own peoples. Here's an example, a quote, "O kings of the earth, we see you increasing every year your expenditures and laying the burden thereof on your subjects. This verily is wholly and grossly unjust. Fear the sighs and tears of this wronged one, and lay not excessive burdens on your peoples. Do not rob them to rear palaces for yourselves, nay rather choose for them that which ye choose for yourselves. Thus we unfold to your eyes that which profiteth you, if ye but perceive. Your people are your treasures. Beware lest your rule violate the commandments of God, and ye deliver your wards to the hands of the robber. By them ye rule, by their means ye subsist, by their aid ye conquer, yet how disdainfully ye look upon them. How strange, how very strange." End quote. And this message from Baha'u'llah to all people, quote, "The Great Being saith, Blessed and happy is he that ariseth to promote the best interests of the peoples and kindreds of the earth." In another passage he hath proclaimed, "It is not for him to pride himself who loveth his own country, but rather for him who loveth the whole world. The earth is but one country, and mankind its citizens." And that's from Baha'u'llah's book, The Proclamation of Baha'u'llah, page 115. The Universal House of Justice, shortened the UHJ, is the elected body of Baha'is who govern the worldwide community of Baha'is. This elected body is the supreme governing body in an organizational structure designed by Baha'u'llah in his tablets and written covenant. It sets the divine succession in his new faith for the centuries to come. The Universal House of Justice published a special message to the whole world back in 1985, and that message is based on Baha'u'llah's plan for the establishment of world peace. The document is titled The Promise of World Peace, and the date of its release was October 1985. Copies of the peace statement were given to the rulers, presidents, and high-level government leaders throughout the world. In the USA, a copy was presented to then-President Reagan. Many Baha'is throughout the USA also presented copies to members of the elected officials and governing bodies in their areas. Such as in my area, copies were given to our state senator and the city's mayor and city council members. Here is a website where you can access this document if it moves you to do so. You can pause the video and write it down if you wish. This is an excerpt from the World Peace Statement, just the first paragraph. To the peoples of the world, the great peace towards which people of good will throughout the centuries have inclined their hearts, of which seers and poets for countless generations have expressed their vision, and for which from age to age the sacred scriptures of mankind have constantly held the promise, is now at long last within the reach of the nations. For the first time in history it is possible for everyone to view the entire planet, with all its myriad diversified peoples, in one perspective. World peace is not only possible, but inevitable. It is the next stage in the evolution of this planet. In the words of one great thinker, the planetization of mankind. Whether peace is to be reached only after unimaginable horrors precipitated by humanity's stubborn clinging to old patterns of behavior, or is to be embraced now by an act of consultative will, is the choice before all who inhabit the earth. End of quote. I remind you that you can look it up and read the whole thing. So for that prophecy number 13, here's Dr. Motla's probability that by chance alone that this prophecy would be fulfilled, that the man who comes to the Holy Land introduces world peace as one of his main goals and offers a plan for its realization. He considered and gave it a probability of 1 in 10. Very conservative figure, 1 in 10. On to prophecy number 14 out of 26. The name of the Redeemer of the world will be the same in all languages. And the source of this, Zechariah chapter 14, verse 9, quote, The Lord will be king over the whole earth. On that day there will be one Lord, and his name the only name. Another aspect to this is in Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 9, quote, For then I will restore to the peoples a pure language, that they may all call on the name of the Lord, to serve him with one accord. End quote. The Bab and Baha'u'llah are known by those names throughout the world. If a Baha'i is in China, in Japan, in Africa, in USA, they all pronounce it the same, the Bab and Baha'u'llah. There are no other forms of the names, and they are all pronounced the same in all those languages. Baha'u'llah includes as one of his main teachings that the peoples of the world should agree upon one language, either an existing language or a created one, such as Esperanto, that all people will learn in addition to their own native tongue. Now please be clear, this is a language that would be chosen by all the nations of the earth to serve as an auxiliary language. Then all peoples would be taught to speak this language in addition to their native tongue. So if the nations selected Esperanto, which was a created language, if it were selected to be this auxiliary language, then people in the United States would speak both English and Esperanto. Then if a person from the United States has business dealings with someone in Germany, the German business people and the American business people can communicate easily in Esperanto. Now, in many regards, the English language is almost already the universal language, since so many people in the world already speak it, in addition to their own languages. But the nations would have to select the language at some point in our future. And here's a quote from Baha'u'llah revealing this divine instruction. Quote, The day is approaching when all the peoples of the world will have adopted one universal language and one common script. When this is achieved, to whatsoever a city a man may journey, it shall be as if he were entering his own home. These things are obligatory and absolutely essential. It is incumbent upon every man of insight and understanding to strive to translate that which hath been written into reality and action." End quote. This, by the way, is also part of Baha'u'llah's plan for the establishment of world peace. And the probability, by chance alone, that the name of the man who calls himself the Redeemer of the world is the same in all languages, per the prophecy number 14, Dr. Matla gives a probability of 1 in 10. Prophecy number 15, the Redeemer of the world has a herald, a forerunner, who will come to prepare the way before him. And the Bible verses as the source for that prophecy, Malachi chapter 4 verse 5, quote, "See, I will send the prophet Elijah to you before that great and dreadful day of the Lord comes." End quote. From the context in this chapter, it is referring to the second advent of the latter days. This is the golden domed shrine of the Bab, underneath which the Bab's earthly remains are interred. The Bab was the herald, the forerunner, the Elijah figure for the coming of Baha'u'llah, the Messiah. Baha'u'llah, the Messiah of the Second Advent, was a disciple of the Bab during the Bab's short ministry, which lasted about 6 years from 1844 to 1850. Some estimate that the Bab had followers in the hundreds of thousands when he was alive. The king of Persia, with the instigation by the clergy, ordered the imprisonment of the Bab, then ultimately his killing by firing squad when suspended from a building on July 9, 1850. The Bab and Baha'u'llah never met. The Bab in his teachings had foretold the appearance of him whom God shall make manifest, who would appear within 9 to 19 years after him, the Bab. Baha'u'llah experienced a revelation from God in 1853 while he was a prisoner in an underground dungeon in Tehran, that he was him whom God shall make manifest, prophesied by the Bab. However, Baha'u'llah did not reveal to others this spiritual revelation of his identity and station. Then Baha'u'llah was exiled by the Persian government to Baghdad. He remained there in forced exile for about 10 years. He announced to the followers of the Bab in 1863, 10 years later, from his revelation, when he had that revelation in prison. Anyway, in 1863, he revealed to the Bab's followers that he was the promised one that the Bab prophesied as coming, as well as the expected Messiah to the Jews, the return of Christ to Christians, as well as the promised one prophesied in the Zoroastrian, Buddhist, and Hindu faiths, among some others. So what is the probability that by chance alone, that someone who claims to be the Redeemer of the world has a herald, a forerunner, who comes to prepare the way before him? Well, the probability was rated as 1 in 500. Prophecy number 16. The title of the prophesied herald will be the Gate, or the Gate of the Lord. And this is a source of that prophecy in the Old Testament, Psalms 118, verses 19 and 20. Quote, "Open for me the gates of the righteous. I will enter and give thanks to the Lord. This is the gate of the Lord, through which the righteous may enter." End quote. And further in the New Testament, in the book of Revelation, chapter 22, verse 14, quote, "Blessed are those who wash their robes, that they may have the right to the tree of life, and may go through the gates into the city." In the brackets there, the city being the new revelation or law of God that the new Messiah brings. And that is added by me for clarification. Remember, the name Bab, when translated into English, means the gate of God or the door of God. A physical door or gate is a barrier that is between you and somewhere you may or may not wish to be. It may be possible to see through a physical gate or door, or it could be a solid barrier that you cannot tell what is on the other side. The gate or door may be locked to keep you from seeing or getting to what is on the other side. But to find out if it is unlocked or to get to the other side, you have to use your own willpower and action to open the door or gate. Or if the gate is opened for you, You must still decide whether you will go through it or not. Now, the spiritual meaning of a gate or door, the realm of the spirit on the other side of the door, is hidden until you make an effort to discern and find it. A new revelation from God is often hidden. To open or shut a gate or door, or simply to walk through it, the individual must exert his or her own volition and action to do so. Spiritually, the Messiah is not going to open the door until you knock, meaning opening the heart to the new revelation from God. And this quote from one of the works of Baha'u'llah called Hidden Words, number 5. O Son of Being, love me that I may love thee. If thou lovest me not, my love can in no wise reach thee. Know this, O servant. And this quote also from Baha'u'llah, quote, the door of grace hath been unlocked, and he who is the dayspring of justice is come with perspicuous signs and evident testimonies from God, the Lord of strength and of might, end quote. And another quote from Baha'u'llah, quote, open the doors of your hearts. He who is the Spirit verily standeth before them. Wherefore banish ye him who hath purposed to draw you nigh unto a resplendent spot. Say, we in truth have opened unto you the gates of the kingdom. Will ye bar the doors of your houses in my face? This indeed is not but a grievous error. He verily hath again come down from heaven, even as he, Jesus, came down from it the first time. Beware lest ye dispute that which he proclaimeth, even as the people before you disputed his utterances. Thus instructeth you the true one, could ye but perceive it. End quote. The Bab, the herald, the forerunner, invites all to come through that gate. So for prophecy number 16, what is the probability that by chance alone that someone with that title of herald or gate or whatever is the gate or the gate of the Lord, who comes to foretell the coming of one yet greater than he? Well, Dr. Mottla rates this probability as 1 in 50. Prophecy number 17, the herald, the Elijah figure, brings good news and will be exiled to live on the mountains. And the Bible source for this prophecy, Isaiah chapter 52, verse 7, quote, how lovely on the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, meaning the forerunner, who announces peace and brings good news of happiness, who announces salvation and says to Zion, your God reigns, end quote. Just as John the Baptist stirred up fear and loathing against him on the part of the clergy and rulers of Judea, the same thing happened when the Bab arose to announce to all that God had sent him to spread the good news of the coming of the Messiah. The Bab was imprisoned in several locations, 2 of which were mountains that he named the Open Mountain. That was in Maku, which is in the western West Azerbaijan province of Iran. That's in the northwest region of Iran. And the other mountain was what he called the Grievous Mountain. It was a fortress named Shirik, again in that western Azerbaijan province of Iran. More of the story will be told in the explanation of how prophecy number 18 was fulfilled, and that's coming up next. This is Maku, the mountain fortress where the Bab was imprisoned for 9 months. He called it the Open Mountain. This is a more recent photo, not from the time period when the Bab was there. He stated that besides himself, the inmates of the fortress were confined to 2 guards and 4 dogs. It rather remote and devoid of much human interaction. So the probability of this prophecy having been fulfilled by chance alone is rated by Dr. Mottla as 1 in 300. And that was the probability that the herald who brings good news is exiled to live on the mountains. 1 in 300. Prophecy 18 of the 26 prophecies we will be reviewing here. The Redeemer becomes qualified for the title of the Lamb by giving his life for his beliefs. And the Bible verses that are the source of this prophecy, from Revelation chapter 5, verses 12 and 13, quote, "Then I looked, and I heard the voice of many angels around the throne, the living creatures and the elders, and the number of them was 10,000 times 10,000, and thousands of thousands, saying with a loud voice, Worthy is the Lamb who was slain, to receive power and riches and wisdom, and strength and honor and glory and blessing." End quote. The Bab proclaimed his identity and his teachings throughout Persia starting on May 23, 1844. He declared a new day with a new revelation from God. As more and more people came to believe in him and his message, and becoming Babis, what his followers were called, government authorities and the Muslim clergy were increasingly concerned and feeling threatened. The Bab knew his life was under threat, yet he persisted in proclaiming that he was the promised one and that another, greater than he, was yet to come after him. First he was imprisoned in a remote fortress named Maku, which he named the Open Mountain because of its unique geological surroundings. Then he was imprisoned in Sharik, a fortress in western Azerbaijan in northwestern Iran. The Bab called this prison the Grievous Mountain. However, imprisonment of the Bab did not work to quell the masses who became followers of the Bab. The Muslim clergy and government leaders pressed the case that the Bab had to be killed to get rid of his teachings of a new religion. The Grand Vizier to the Shah ordered the Bab to be taken to the barracks at Tabriz, and an Armenian regiment assigned to put him to death by a firing squad. A young follower of the Bab, Mirza Muhammad Ali, pleaded to be able to die with the Bab. The Bab and the young man were hoisted up and suspended in front of a wall of the barracks. The 750 rifles of the regiment led by a Christian colonel, Sam Khan, fired. But when the smoke cleared, just Mirza Muhammad Ali was standing alone, unharmed. The bullets had merely cut the ropes used to suspend them. They found the Bab in his prison cell conversing with his amanuensis, that's a scribe, that had been interrupted before. Sam Khan refused his regiment being involved in a second attempt. Sam Khan ordered his men to leave the barracks. A new regiment of 750 soldiers then proceeded with the execution at noon on July 9, 1850. This is a photograph of the wall of the army barracks in Tabriz, Persia, where the Bab and the young follower who pleaded to die with him were strung up by ropes and ultimately shot to death by firing squad. According to Shoghi Effendi, the great-grandson of Baha'u'llah, and you'll learn more about him later, wrote the following about the murderous villains who succeeded in killing the Bab. Quote, "The arch-villains who joined hands with the prime movers of so wicked a conspiracy were the two Grand Viziers, Haji Mirza Akasi, the idolized tutor of Muhammad Shah, king of Persia, a vulgar, false-hearted, and fickle-minded schemer, and the arbitrary, bloodthirsty, reckless Amir Nizam, Mirza Taqi Khan, the first of whom exiled the Bab to the mountain fastnesses of Azerbaijan, and the latter decreed his death in Tabriz." End quote. And the probability calculation for prophecy number 18, what is the probability by chance alone that the man who calls himself a redeemer becomes qualified for the title of the Lamb by giving his life for his beliefs? Dr. Matla comes to the figure of 1 in 300. Prophecy 19, the promised Elijah figure, the Lamb of the book of Revelation, will give his life for his beliefs and has also thousands of followers who follow his example, meaning they give their lives for their beliefs. And this prophecy comes from Revelation chapter 7, verses 13 to 17. Quote, "Then one of the elders answered, saying to me, Who are these, arrayed in white robes, and where did they come from? And I said to him, Sir, you know. So he said to me, These are the ones who come out of the great tribulation, and washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb." End quote. After the Bab's execution by firing squad on July 9, 1850, in Tabriz, the Muslim clergy and the government of the Shah persecuted the followers of the Bab, called Babis. Many Babis were imprisoned. Over 20,000 Babis, including men, women, and children, were killed. These martyrs for the new faith of God are those in this prophecy. Quote, "These are the ones who come out of the great tribulation and washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb." End quote, the Lamb being the Bab. So for prophecy number 19, what is the probability by chance alone that the man who gives his life for his beliefs has also thousands of followers who follow in his example, giving their lives for their beliefs? Dr. Matla assigns a probability of 1 in 50. Prophecy 20. The two redeemers who establish a religion will specifically be called the glory of God and the lamp. This prophecy is from the book of Isaiah, chapter 62, verses 1 and 2. Quote, "For Zion's sake I will not hold my peace, and for Jerusalem's sake I will not rest, until her righteousness goes forth as brightness," meaning the Messiah, "and her salvation as the lamp," the Lamb, "that burns. The Gentiles shall see your righteousness, and all kings your glory. You shall be called by a new name, which the mouth of the Lord will name." End quote. And another chapter and verse that this prophecy comes from, that's Revelation chapter 21, verses 22 and 23. Quote, "I did not see a temple in the city, because the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. The city does not need the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives it light, and the Lamb is its lamp." End quotation. And here is a quote from the writings of the Bab about himself. Quote, "I am the mystic fane which the hand of omnipotence hath reared. I am the lamp which the finger of God hath lit within its niche, and caused to shine with deathless splendor. I am the flame of that supernal light that glowed upon Sinai in the gladsome spot, and lay concealed in the midst of the burning bush." End quote. A lamp provides illumination to guide one in the dark. The lamp of God provides spiritual illumination. Humankind cannot find its own way in the spiritual world. We must follow the guidance of the manifestations of God. The lamp of God and the forerunner stations combine to lead the way to him whom God shall make manifest, the Messiah. The following quote is from Shoghi Effendi, another important figure in the Baha'i faith that you will hear more about later. He speaks here of the Bab. Quote, "We behold, as we survey the episodes of this first act of a sublime drama, the figure of its master hero, the Bab, arise meteor-like above the horizon of Shiraz, traverse the somber sky of Persia from south to north, decline with tragic swiftness, and perish in a blaze of glory. We see his satellites, a galaxy of God-intoxicated heroes, mount above that same horizon, irradiate that same incandescent light, burn themselves out with that self-same swiftness, and impart in their turn an added impetus to the steadily gathering momentum of God's nascent faith." End quote. And that's from Shoghi Effendi's book, God Passes By. The description of how the lamp of God burned brightly, went out in a blaze of glory, then his followers doing the same, gives an indication of the light that came from the lamp of God, the Bab, and his followers. And the glory of God, or the glory of the Lord in these prophecies, is Baha'u'llah, as previously explained. So what is the probability, by chance alone, that the two redeemers who establish a religion are specifically called the glory of God and the lamp? The probability of 1 in 1,000 is assigned here. Think about this too. How many have called themselves the glory of God? How many have called themselves the lamp? And to have two people who never met call themselves this during the same period of time is quite astounding, if it were due to only chance alone. Prophecy 21. The kings and rulers of the earth conspire against the two Redeemers, the Lord and his appointed king, respectively the lamp and lamb, the Elijah figure, and the glory of God, meaning the Lord of hosts, the Messiah. And the verses that are the source of the prophecy, Psalms 2, verses 1 and 2, quote, "Why do the nations conspire and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth rise up, and the rulers band together against the Lord and against his anointed." End quote. And from the book of Revelation, chapter 17, verses 14 and 17, quote, "They will wage war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will triumph over them, because he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and with him will be his called, chosen, and faithful followers. For God has put it in their hearts to accomplish his purpose by agreeing to hand over to the beast their loyal authority until God's words are fulfilled." End quote. The prominent enemies of the Bab were Muhammad Shah, king of Persia from 1834 to 1848, and his son Nasiruddin Shah, king of Persia from 1848 to 1896, when he was assassinated, and the Grand Vizier Haji Mirza Akasi, who was, by the way, the Antichrist of the Babi dispensation. And the principal powerful enemies of Baha'u'llah were Nasiruddin Shah, king of Persia, mentioned before, 1848 to 1896, when he was assassinated. Baha'u'llah called him the Prince of Oppressors. The Grand Vizier Haji Mirza Akasi, both of them also were in opposition to the Bab, of course. And the Sultan of Turkey, Abdul Aziz of the Ottoman Empire from 1861 to 1876, Syed Muhammad-i Isfahani, who was the Antichrist of the Baha'i revelation. Note that the kings of Persia, the Sultan of Turkey, and their government leaders at times conspired to try to eliminate or contain the revelation of Baha'u'llah. Note that the two kings of Persia, Muhammad Shah and his son Nasiruddin Shah, were the third evil beast of the book of Revelation, the one that 666 of Revelation chapter 13 verse 18 refers to. Revelation describes this beast as having one head with two horns, meaning a single kingdom, but two different kings. Note that in the book of Daniel chapter 7 verse 17, the term beast is explained as representing an earthly king in the language of Bible prophecy. Please watch my video, Revelation Revealed, to learn all about the meaning of the book of Revelation. The divine power that came from the revelations of the Bab and Baha'u'llah also brought out the dark side, shall we call it, of humans who react negatively to the divine light. The Antichrist to the Bab's revelation was the Grand Vizier to Muhammad Shah, Haji Mirza Akasi. He was the vizier to both Persian kings who were the beast 666, as we saw in the previous slide. And to the Baha'i revelation, Syed Muhammad-i Isfahani was the Antichrist, causing great dissension in the Babi and Baha'i communities of believers through deviousness, dishonesty, and duplicitous actions. So for prophecy number 21, what is the probability by chance alone that the kings and rulers of the earth conspire against the two Redeemers, the Lord and his appointed king? Dr. Matla assigns it a probability of 1 in 30. Prophecy number 22. From the glory of God, the Lord of hosts, there will also emerge a third figure other than Elijah and the glory of God, named the servant, the branch, or the branch of the Lord. And the Bible verses that this prophecy comes from, Zechariah chapter 6, verse 12, quote, "Then speak to him, saying, Thus says the Lord of hosts, saying, Behold the man whose name is the branch. From his place he shall branch out, and he shall build the temple of the Lord." End quote. And from Isaiah chapter 11, verses 1 to 5, quote, "There shall come forth a rod from the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the spirit of counsel and might, the spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord." End quote. The rod from the stem of Jesse means a tool of measurement. In this use, a divinely sent judge of humanity, a manifestation of God, the Messiah sent to measure or judge humanity. Now, from the stem of Jesse meaning the line of Jesse's descent, was from Abraham. Baha'u'llah is a descendant of Abraham from his third wife, Keturah. And the phrase, "and a branch shall grow out of his roots," means a descendant from that rod, meaning a descendant of the Messiah, of Baha'u'llah. This was Abdu'l-Baha, the eldest surviving son of Baha'u'llah. Abdu'l-Baha in English means the servant of Baha, the servant of the glory. This is a photograph of the branch, Abdu'l-Baha. Again, Abdu'l-Baha means servant of the glory in English. He was born in 1844, the exact day and year that the Bab proclaimed that he was the promised one to his first disciple. And Abdu'l-Baha passed away in 1921. His given name was Abbas Effendi, as he was known to those who were not Baha'is. Please note that Baha'i law prohibits showing photographs or artistic renditions of both the Bab and Baha'u'llah to prevent their ever being used as idols in worship. This photo is by courtesy of the Baha'i Media Bank. And it should be noted that Abdu'l-Baha is not a manifestation of God. He is purely human. As mentioned, Abdu'l-Baha is 100% human. He is not a manifestation of God like his father. He does, however, have a special divine purpose and abilities given to him by Baha'u'llah. He was endowed with superhuman knowledge, for instance. Just read some of his writings and you will see that quite quickly. Baha'u'llah appointed Abdu'l-Baha, the branch, as his successor and head of the Baha'i faith, and referred to him as the center of the covenant, as a reflection of that. Another distinct title that Abdu'l-Baha has is the exemplar of the faith. We Baha'is are to look at him, how he conducted his life, as a means of learning how we ordinary human beings should conduct our lives. This is a letter that Baha'u'llah sent to Abdu'l-Baha when Abdu'l-Baha was away in Beirut on a journey. Baha'u'llah addresses Abdu'l-Baha as the most mighty branch of God. As you will hear in this letter, Baha'u'llah, the Messiah, the Lord of hosts, is overflowing with praise of his son. He also called Abdu'l-Baha the immutable mystery, and in another written tribute to him, Baha'u'llah referred to him as the mystery of God. So here it goes, quote, "Praise be to him who hath honored the land of Ba, Beirut, through the presence of him round whom all names revolve, Abdu'l-Baha. All the atoms of the earth have announced unto all created things that from behind the gate of the prison city there hath appeared, and above its horizon there hath shone forth the orb of the beauty of the great, the most mighty branch of God, his ancient and immutable mystery, proceeding on its way to another land. Sorrow thereby hath enveloped this prison city, whilst another land rejoiceth. Exalted, immeasurably exalted is our Lord, the fashioner of the heavens, and the creator of all things. He through whose sovereignty the doors of the prison were opened, thereby causing what was promised aforetime in the tablets to be fulfilled. He is verily potent over what he willeth, and in his grasp is the dominion of the entire creation. He is the all-powerful, the all-knowing, the all-wise." End quote. A few of Abdu'l-Baha's accomplishments: he coordinated the bringing of the remains of the Bab from their hiding place in Persia to the Holy Land. He constructed the building that would become the Bab's final resting place on Mount Carmel, and personally carried out his internment in 1909. He wrote many, many prayers and books. He was the cement that held the early Baha'i community together there in the Holy Land through very tough times. And he was the Baha'i community's ambassador to local officials and even to the British troops in and around World War I, including General Allenby. He traveled throughout Western Europe and even to the USA and Canada, spreading the loving message of Baha'u'llah in the period 1911 and 1912. He ensured the proper succession of the leadership of the faith. which is very important, and many other accomplishments that will be expounded upon shortly. So what is the probability by chance alone that in the religion founded by the man who calls himself the glory of God, there will emerge a third figure named the servant, the branch, or the branch of the Lord? Dr. Matla rates it as a probability of 1 in 50. Prophecy 23, the branch of the Lord will bless the land by planting vines and trees. The source Bible verses for this are Zechariah chapter 3, verses 8 to 10. Quote, "For behold, I am bringing forth my servant the branch. For behold, the stone that I have laid before Joshua, upon the stone are 7 eyes. Behold, I will engrave its inscription, says the Lord of hosts, and I will remove the iniquity of that land in 1 day. In that day, says the Lord of hosts, everyone will invite his neighbor under his vine," his being the branch, "his vine, and under his fig tree." And from Isaiah chapter 4, verse 2, quote, "In that day the branch of the Lord shall be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the earth shall be excellent and appealing for those of Israel who have escaped." End quote. Here are some of the fruit of the earth that were a result of the work of the branch, Abdu'l-Baha. These are some additional photos to remind you of the previously reviewed Vineyard of God, Carmel, and other areas that are holy places of the Baha'i community on Mount Carmel or in and around Akka. And these gardens are meticulously maintained because these are holy spots for Baha'is and for the rest of the world, until they finally recognize the Bab and Baha'u'llah. The beautiful gardens at both the Shrine of the Bab on Mount Carmel and the Shrine of Baha'u'llah outside of Akka were conceived and started through the direction of the branch, Abdu'l-Baha. The branch had some early believers bring plants from Persia and elsewhere to plant on Mount Carmel. The branch, Abdu'l-Baha, was deeply involved in planning and carrying out horticulture projects, including a project before World War I where the branch had the old Roman grain pits that had not been used for a long, long time refurbished to once again hold grain that was produced from the community's farming efforts. This practice helped feed the local inhabitants in World War I and was used to feed British troops who had saved Abdu'l-Baha's life, thus assuring the Baha'i community's survival too. The branch, Abdu'l-Baha, received a knighthood from Great Britain for his foresight and actions in saving the people from starving and for feeding the British troops. So, what was the probability by chance alone that this branch of the Lord will bless the land by planting vines and trees? Dr. Matla's view is 1 in 5. Prophecy number 24, the branch will build the temple of the Lord. And this is the Bible verse source for that. Zechariah chapter 6, verses 12 and 13, quote, "Then speak to him, saying, Thus says the Lord of hosts, saying, Behold, the man whose name is the branch. From his place he shall branch out, and he shall build the temple of the Lord." End quote. You may recall seeing this photo before earlier in the presentation of the original sanctuary of the Bab, and this photo was taken around 1910 to 1919. The Bab's holy remains were brought to Haifa from Persia and buried in this temple. The superstructure of the Shrine of the Bab was built above it. It was Abdu'l-Baha, the branch, the servant of the glory, who accomplished this. With the death of the branch in 1921, the already planned superstructure over the Shrine of the Bab continued. This photo is of the Shrine of the Bab around 1952, when the superstructure over the Bab sanctuary was under construction. And here is the Shrine of the Bab as you see it today on the side of Mount Carmel, with its 9 terraces above the Shrine of the Bab up to the top of the mountain, and the 9 terraces below the Shrine of the Bab to the bottom of the mountain. And these terraces, as well as the shrine, were all in the original concept of Baha'u'llah as he gave it to Abdu'l-Baha and carried out after his passing. And here are some nighttime scenes of the Shrine of the Bab, when the shrine and the terraces and the grounds are illuminated. Quite a beautiful scene. Abdu'l-Baha also had the Shrine of Baha'u'llah completed just outside of Akka to honor the resting place of the Messiah of this age. The Messiah is forever interred in this holy spot. He will be in the Holy Land for eternity, as promised in the prophecies in the Bible. This is the holiest spot on earth to Baha'is, and is the point towards which we face when we pray, called the Qibla, which means the point of adoration. And here are shown the beautiful gardens around the Shrine of Baha'u'llah, as envisioned by the branch. The formal gardens add this lovely serenity to the holiest spot on earth to Baha'is, and in the future to most of the world's population, according to Baha'i prophecies. So as far as the probability, by chance alone, that this prophecy number 24 would be fulfilled, that the branch will build the temple of the Lord, Dr. Matla gave it a probability rating of 1 in 100. On to prophecy number 25, and there's only one more prophecy after this one, so be patient. Prophecy 25, people from faraway places will come to build the temple of the Lord. And the source of this prophecy is Zechariah chapter 6, verse 15. Even those from afar shall come and build the temple of the Lord. Then you shall know that the Lord of hosts has sent me to you. This prophecy was fulfilled by the builders of the initial sanctuaries of the two manifestations of God for this age, those temples, because they were people from Persia. There were some local artisans, and later when the superstructure of the Shrine of the Bab was built, the architect was from Canada, and workers from several nations came to build the temple, as well as local artisans. The source of the granite was Italy, and some of the Italian stone supply company artisans directed or assisted in their placement. In 2010 and 11, the shrine was refurbished, including the addition of specially designed earthquake-resistant features, which were designed and constructed by an international group of people. During that project, new gold-plated ceramic tiles from Portugal replaced the old gold-embossed clay tiles that were on the dome originally and had deteriorated. So we come to probabilities. What is the probability by chance alone that people from faraway places will come to build the temple of the Lord? Dr. Matla gives it a probability of 1 in 40. And here we are at prophecy number 26, the last prophecy we're going to get into detail about. But I do want it to be understood that we are saying that all the prophecies of the second advent of the Messiah have been fulfilled by the Baha'u'llah and the other persons involved in the faith and the faith community itself. We're just stopping here with prophecy 26 because it takes a long time, as you've noticed. So onward to our last prophecy that we'll explain here, and that prophecy is a figure named the Zeal of the Lord arises to build a pattern for a global community. And the biblical source for this prophecy is Isaiah chapter 9, verses 6 and 7. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this." End quote. And another biblical source for this is Isaiah chapter 37, verses 31 and 32. Quote, "Once more a remnant of the kingdom of Judah will take root below, and bear fruit above, for out of Jerusalem will come a remnant, and out of Mount Zion a band of survivors. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this." End quote. On the left in this photograph is the branch, Abdu'l-Baha, and on the right is his grandson, the zeal of the Lord Almighty, in this photo taken in 1919. His earthly name was Shoghi Effendi. He was the son of one of Abdu'l-Baha's daughters. He was born in March of 1897 and passed away in 1957. He led the Baha'i Faith World Community from 1921, when he was appointed by Abdu'l-Baha as his successor in Abdu'l-Baha's last will and testament. Shoghi Effendi was called the guardian of the faith. So what was the purpose of the zeal of God? What was the zeal to accomplish? Well, Baha'u'llah brought the divine conception of the